So as was said, I'm from the Toronto office. I did spend 5 years in London, 4 of which I was working at Arup as an existing structures specialist, which is what I have continued to do over here. And naturally, as part of my role of specializing in structural assessment and retrofit, you sort of very quickly start to go into the work around trying to improve the sustainability and lower the amount of carbon and waste that we are generating for the built environment. We've already sort of touched on this, I would argue several times, but what, we talk about the circular economy as if it's sort of like, this one all-encompassing descriptor, but what does it tangibly mean? So currently, buildings in particular account for about 37% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, and around 95% of the construction materials that go within it are lost in demolition later on. Now, that's a massive problem, to be very blunt. And the whole concept of circular economy is looking at, rather than having that 95% go to waste, it's trying to, use the classic approach that you've heard of since you were a little kid: reduce, reuse, recycle. And we're not just looking at carbon, we're also looking at energy efficiency and embodied energy as well. So that whole idea of moving from sort of a linear make to waste and going from eliminate all the way to regenerate is kind of the high level catchphrase of what you're looking at from a circular economy perspective. Now, how do we define it? What are the exact principles that go into that? So in a circular economy, we are looking at sort of using healthy, low carbon materials, and we're circulating it in continuous cycles. We're not downgrading it, as Christy said. We're reusing it with its original purpose or its original capacity in mind. So this would consider, for instance, increased resilience, again, using lower carbon materials in an intelligent way, looking at deconstructibility in buildings and reusability elsewhere. So a nice classic example is taking an old brick from a historic building or from an older building that has been demolished or deconstructed, and using that reclaimed brick later on in a newer building for various many reasons. Now, brick is a really nice example because it's something that we do a little bit more readily, I would say, than other materials at this point in time, because reclaimed brick obviously has it has a sort of an aesthetic and historic value to it that you can't necessarily associate with other building materials at this point in time. So the different tools that I'm going to be going through, I can't say I've used every single one in detail, but all of these tools are available more or less for free online, and the purpose of them is to help inform your design decisions and how you're going to look at or consider circularity in your design. B, how you're going to communicate with various stakeholders, so such as your clients, other architects, engineers, professionals, suppliers, manufacturers, and your constructors, on how you're going to actually implement it and where the limits and the options and capacity is for circular design. So it's the practical form of communication is really, really important in helping aid in that design decisions. So the first one that I'm going to go through is it's a collaboration between the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and Arup to create a circular economy toolkit. Now, this one is a simple web-based platform where it sort of goes through with 3 main stages or components in mind, which is learn, so informing the users what and how and where you can incorporate circular economy principles into your design at an early stage, and then also engage, where you're looking at having resources to hold a workshop with all the different stakeholders, and giving you the resources available so you can do that without spending an extensive amount of time coming up with something from scratch. And then also there's ACT, where you can actually register a project in the Circular Economy Toolkit, and you can sort of update, implement, you can update the implementation that you're making for these different projects and track the project's performance. So the Circular Economy Toolkit framework is focused around, again, the 4 key principles that we've been talking about all along. So build nothing, build for long-term value, build efficiently, and build with the right materials. And then within that, the toolkit outlines 10 different circular design strategies that can be used to achieve or address those aims and goals. So each of those different strategies have their own individual KPI. They've got priorities. So, you know, ideally, you build nothing. If you can't build nothing, then you want to build something that is resilient and can be deconstructed. And in addition to that, you also want to build something that is minimizing the amount of virgin material that you're using, for instance. And all of this sort of incorporates a flexible implementation, and it's in alignment with the existing guidelines and frameworks that are currently out there. So this is just a quick example. There's strategy cards and action cards. When you click on it, you can see sort of a description of the different strategies and the different actions. There's included sort of the relevant KPIs, the benefits, the challenges, what the actual impact level of that strategy is, and where its impact is, or how you can incorporate it at what design phase, and the overall designer impact. So there's also case studies that are available on the platform that you can go through. This aids in sort of, again, communication with different stakeholders, but also aids in sort of your own ideas and inspiration and idea generation and development. So those are on there and they're available for free. And then, as I said, another component of the workshop, of the platform, is the workshop material, where it sort of goes through how you can talk to the different stakeholders in sort of a more formal, structured setting to get everyone on board and make sure that everyone's talking to each other, so you know that you're all speaking the same language, to be very blunt, but then also to know that you are able to really understand what, say, your client aims and goals are, which may help further inform your design capability to include circular economy concepts. Now, moving on from that, Rhinocircular is another tool. It's a Grasshopper plugin, and it looks more specifically at the circularity of materials. It does incorporate the Ellen MacArthur material circularity indicator formulae. So it is consistent with the previous tool that I mentioned. What it does is, again, it's really nicely implemented and incorporated with Grasshopper. And you can put in sort of, you're looking at using this at sort of your initial, REBA stage 2 design, where you're developing your concept design, and it considers sort of the different sort of parameters around the material that you're using and how you're using it. So in particular, this would include sort of, your cradle to grave or cradle to cradle approach, and it produces a circularity index and a material passport for all the materials that you're considering using. So you can see sort of just on the left-hand side, that's a snippet or an extract from the Rhinocircular webpage on Food for Rhino. And that's a report that it would generate. So it has your sort of circularity pathways in there, and also sort of where you're taking your material from and where it's going to. So the pros and cons of the Rhinocircular toolkit is that, well, it feeds really, really well into the existing Grasshopper ecosystem. So if you're working well within Grasshopper, that is great, and it's easy to sort of add into that. It updates the calculations immediately within the Rhino environment, so you can immediately see sort of how different parameters impact the circularity index of the design that you're looking into. And it's really, really easy to adapt for different materials and different designs. and so on and so forth. Now, there are some limits, so it's not specific to structural engineering. So that's why it's sort of good to use it at the beginning stages, but it's not necessarily the most useful thing sort of farther down into sort of REBA stage 4. It does have a limited data set because the end of use pathways are not yet widely reported in the US and in other countries. And so the materials that are on there, they're dependent on sort of limited EPDs, and they are limited to what the reliability of the EPDs that are fed into it. Now, on the flip side, what is really nice is it's not looking at specific product EPDs. It's taking a conglomerate and using that to produce sort of a more generic input for a more generic material. It is, again, sort of more...
Just interrupt. It's we're in.
Sorry? Oh, okay.
3 minutes. You got 3 minutes.
Okay. Yep. All right. So it's, so it is more for the early design stage. Now, going on to that, there are also stock finder websites. These websites, they're more for looking into how you can actually source recycled material. So, for instance, there's Globe Chain and there's Loopfront. There are more on the UK Green Building Council website, and it's super, super useful. But it essentially helps you find and source recycled material, but it also gives people that own the existing waste product or potential waste product a location where they can sell it or give it away for free. So that's really nice and really useful for reducing waste. In addition to that, there is also the Circular Partnerships database that is from the IStrictD, and that can be found on the IStrictD website. So Regenerate is another tool. I'm not going to go into detail about this because there is a publication on the IStrictD website about it, but it is sort of similar to what I've previously mentioned, where you're putting in your design and it's trying to tell you how circular your design is, depending on different parameters and considerations that you implement. And then the final one is there is a toolkit specifically for steel reuse. And it tells you, and it sort of gives you the advantages and limitations for how to practically reuse existing steel, where obvious limitations are sort of, you can't use steel from before the 1970s. There's challenges with lead paint. And it does also give you sort of supply chain models and case studies as well. So these are just some examples, which I will not go into detail. They are on the ASBP website, and sort of success and unsuccessful stories. Now, the conclusion is there's lots of tools available. So really, there's no excuse to not design or consider circularity in mind at the early and at the late stage. So yeah, that's all.